How come I'm not seeing? How come? Okay, go ahead. This is Donato Di Geronimo.
This was Andolino's Market for, I would guess, almost 60 years, at least 50 years. It just closed about 4 years ago, maybe around 2000, 2001. It was here. It sold by all homemade sausage, which is one of the best around. He had, it was a grocery store and meat market. So I would come here because he had a great old soda machine. And I would get, they were ice cold Yoo-hoos, and that was my treat. Every Saturday morning I would come over.
That's great. Was that like a kind of like a hangout?
Not for me, but it was a hangout for a lot of the people in the area. They would just. Matty Andolino was he retired from here, I guess, like I said, about 4 years ago.
Okay.
And Franciosi's, and there was a sign.
Back in the back, Donato, back there.
In the back. And this sign here had we have a picture with this sign. On here, the old pictures.
Exactly, right, in the 1940s. So 104 or 106 may have been the residence of the Pace family.
One of those books from 1948.
Right.
That has all the names of everybody where they lived, the residents and everything.
Right. Okay.
I have one from, I gotta think about it. I've been giving so many people where they know.
Okay, so we're at Adorno's Butcher Shop.
Right.
Okay.
As a store, it's been vacant for at least 20 years.
Right.
For a long time. I don't remember what it was last time.
Okay. So this is 102. Can you say that again, Donato?
102 Pine Street. The church owns it now. It's what's the C?
Yeah, like the CCD.
CCD. They have the CCD classes in here now. It was the convent for a while when the nuns were still here. So I guess the church has probably owned this since the 60s.
Okay.
When they bought the
Yeah. So how often? So for you, like, what does this area mean? Like Pine Street?
For me, this area means going to church, weddings, funerals, and the feast.
Okay.
The feast used to be up and down Pine Street. It went from the train tracks here, on that corner, and it went to Glenridge Avenue. Watch your back. The sewer line. It went to the Glenridge Avenue down that side.
Okay.
And around Glenridge Avenue.
Right.
Both sides of Glenridge Avenue. It went around the corner. So the feast was, it was a big feast. The rides were in the church.
Right.
The church grounds. I went to nursery school here.
Oh, really? Where?
Right where the church parking lot. It was actually the convent. And the nuns lived on the second floor. And the classrooms were on the first floor.
Okay.
I used to cry every day because I didn't want to be dropped off here.
Oh, who dropped you off?
My mother. Or my father.
Now, Donato, here, this is St. Sebastian Way, and it's cut by the
train tracks.
The train tracks now, right? So this used to go all the way straight through, and then we would hit
Sherman Avenue on both sides, and then you would hit Bay Avenue.
Exactly. Okay. And Cherry was also eliminated. Cherry Street.
Cherry Street was down ran parallel with Bloomfield Avenue.
Okay.
And it was on the other side of the tracks.
Okay. Saying this was a cold water flat.
This one was a mess for a while. They finally fixed it. This one they've done really nice. It's beautiful inside now.
It is. Yeah.
For a while when he first got married, the singer.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I can see if I can find out. My cousin may know. Okay. Because he used to hang out in the gas station, my uncle's gas station.
Oh, cool. Okay. This is Frank Gerard Godlewski taking us through the Pine Street area on September 9th, accompanied by Donato Di Geronimo, and we're here at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church. So, Frank, when you gave the walking tour, you gave us some general overview of the area, and you're being sort of a architectural expert. If you can, give us some general ideas about what you see in the area, what's notable and of interest to us.
I would say that the whole transformation and evolution of this neighborhood is really interesting to know, because in the early 1800s this was farmland.
Right.
There was Tony's Brook down towards the intersection.
Okay.
And that was important because it was, primitively it was also a means of access just by people walking.
Right.
And then Bloomfield Avenue was built around then too, around the early 1800s. That
Okay.
didn't exist. The old road actually is where the light is, Glenridge Avenue.
Okay.
It's like a pre-suburban farm road.
Okay.
And then the next one was Claremont Avenue, and that was the only way of getting from, let's say, the area of the plains and the river and
Okay.
Newark,
Okay.
all the
Oh,
way
I see.
over the mountain.
Okay.
So that was a very important thoroughfare, especially for commerce and for agriculture.
Okay.
So this was land that belonged mainly to the Crane family.
Okay.
The closest house being on the other side of what is now Bloomfield Avenue, and on Claremont Avenue, the house that's now the Caggiano Funeral Home.
Okay. Right.
On Glenridge Avenue in Grove.
Yes, and that's been very important for the Italian American community too. Donato, that it was a community center for Italian Americans, and it was like a mission house for Italian Americans, for the children. So that's sort of the beginning.
Okay.
And then with the foundation, and with the church,
Right.
St. Lucy's Church, and the community, they began to build here. Now,
Mount Carmel Church. He's in the wrong city.
all right, you can
Illinois.
edit.
You can edit that.
Mount
Okay.
Carmel Church.
We will.
All right. So, I mean, what I could say about how this developed here,
Uh-huh.
let's say from farmland to a small nucleus of Italian community, Italians were immigrating from Italy to the United States. All of the work was basically saturated already in Brooklyn and
Right.
Newark.
Right.
And that my family was organizing work in Newark. They had a construction company, doctors and a lawyer, so that they would set up the arrival. They would sponsor the Italian Americans who wanted to come to live with their families in the United States. So basically,
Okay.
what they would do, and this is what I would say happened here, you would get a job basically with a contractor as a bricklayer for a man.
Right.
Then that contractor would also offer you housing in
Right,
the houses
right.
that he was building, and that's that. These types of houses, we could see differences, a hierarchy in building type. You
Okay.
see,
For
the
example?
tenement,
Okay.
which is let's say mass housing with very few bathroom facilities.
Okay.
That would be, let's say, the most modest.
And do we see some here?
97.
Would you say this one?
97 was that was a tenement. Like it had very few bathrooms.
Right, and what you would do is you would be able to house families,
Okay.
a lot of them, give them homes.
Okay.
But then that would differ from, let's say, a casa padronale, which
Okay.
you have in
Do you
Italy.
see one here?
Yeah, Ascarino.
Uh huh.
You have a whole different type of house where different family members, I would assume, would have apartment units.
Uh huh.
On various floors, and then you have the family name.
Right. Right. I see it.
The Scarano family would do that. So I mean, that's a different type of situation. It's not like tenement housing. It's
Right.
more of a padrone.
Uh huh.
And then you see also here architecturally, you can see suburban buildings that have been modified into houses, and here we'll show you an example right there on the corner.
Okay.
You see an old little farm construction, and that's probably from, I would say, the back part
The back part. Okay.
is that's probably from before 1800. And then the front part, was modified so that it could become a more modern housing to accommodate the immigrants.
Okay. Excellent.
And we see other buildings like the one on the corner. Now, don't forget, one of the most important thoroughfares at that time was the street right here,
There was the main
Glenridge
street in
Avenue.
Montclair. 'Cause
Say that again. I'm sorry.
the old road on Glenridge, which is Glenridge Avenue, was the main street in Montclair because Bloomfield Avenue was a toll road owned
Right.
by the Cranes. So the people traveled on the old road, which would take them up to the Five Corners, across Church Street, to Valley Road,
Right.
back down Valley Road to Claremont Avenue, and up Claremont Avenue. That's the way you would go to Verona from that way, without paying the tolls.
I see.
Exactly. But that's the way you would also go to Orange.
Okay.
And you know, these were important agricultural thoroughfares.
Right. Right.
And it's very interesting because Bloomfield Avenue could be considered an axis of development for the Italian American.
Right.
Because from Newark, where they would originally sort of come or here,
Right.
and then as soon as they would establish themselves, pay off the people that offered them the service of being sponsored. Once they were able to have enough money to better themselves,
Right.
they would move farther west on
Exactly.
Bloomfield Avenue.
Exactly. Okay.
They would
okay.
move, and that's what happened here to the community. Here, as people prospered and families grew, they could move to better houses. So
Precisely.
from an apartment or a tenement, they could then have, you know, a single-family house in a town like West Orange or Verona, or you know, they would just keep moving west.
There was, I mean, even in the time of my parents buying their first house in
Right.
1962,
Right.
there was some kind of redlining where they would, you know, the Italians weren't very welcome in certain
Certainly.
communities.
Certainly.
Mostly north of Claremont Avenue.
Right.
It was kind of slow into doing it, and they
Right.
weren't so accepted, especially
Right.
in the 1940s and 50s.
Exactly.
In the late 50s and 60s, it started to be a little more acceptable.
Right.
I remember my grandfather, when he built his house in Spring Lake, it was because he wanted to play golf, and
Right.
it wasn't easy for you to be accepted into a golf
In the
club.
clubs. Exactly.
Even at that time, if you were
Right.
Catholic.
Right. Right.
I mean, Italian American was one thing. We look at the census. In the census of Montclair, there's whites, blacks, and Italians on the census. It's
Right. Right.
I mean,
right.
that's how they would do the polls.
Absolutely. So,
So,
the color line here, yeah, is very important. Right. Right.
you know, it was you were considered from an ethnic group that apparently needed to be monitored or given services to.
Sure. Sure.
So it was still different.
In the 1948 Civil Rights Audit, it speaks to that a little bit, but mostly it was talking about African American.
Exactly.
But there was some discrimination. There was some
No
discrimination
problem.
against the Italians that it spoke to,
Right.
mostly in employment.
Right, right.
The municipality, the government, apparently was worked well with everybody at that time,
Right.
in the
Right.
40s. so
Right.
so-
Right. Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
Montclair was a very interesting case in social development because it was a town known for their
Kind of progressive, forward-thinking.
yes, and also for social betterment.
Absolutely.
And there were
Right.
many church groups.
Right.
And there was the Mini Lucy initiative
Uh-huh.
for the Italian Americans.
Right.
For the immigrants. Mini Lucy organized herself to be able to take care of the children and to teach them and to
And classes for the women, and sewing,
good
and
nutrition
And
Hygiene and things like
we have
that.
photos going back to 1914 with
Right.
Lucy and running those classes, and predominantly they were Italian American and African American.
right, right,
in the
right.
class.
They're lovely photos. I remember
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's also very interesting to see how the development of the Italian American community and the African American community in Montclair have been very parallel.
Indeed.
They've
That's
been
right.
very close parallelly. You see that even today,
Mm-hmm.
I think, in you know, in the society of Montclair, because Montclair, although it was always striving towards social betterment,
Right.
it always remained segregated,
Right.
but not officially.
Right, absolutely.
Just
Right,
socially.
right, right.
You know, you have your middle class and wealthy middle class
Mm-hmm.
African American families and Italian American families that go way back.
Right.
To like the beginning of the you know, the 20th century.
Right.
But they always remain together, and the Italians and the African Americans always remain quite linked.
It's great how you say it. It is a parallel history. It is.
Yeah, and here we are in the Fourth Ward, and that's where it took place, and it was also a subject of study, of national study.
But I believe
Right.
the Italian Americans were able to gain a little more upward mobility a
Right.
little sooner than the African Americans.
Right.
in Montclair and probably in the United States.
Right, right.
And the impact of that in this area, when the Italian Americans were leaving kind of in droves in the late 50s,
Yes,
and then
yes.
much more into
Sure.
the 60s.
So-called white flight.
Right,
Mhm.
in the development, I think that altered the perspective of both sides. I think it altered the perspective of Italian Americans looking back to
Absolutely.
where they were.
Absolutely.
And sometimes not for the better.
And actually, that's something that's being discussed in academic circles as well, and not just in the community. It's important to remember that so-called shift and the alliances that the Italian American community formed or left, in its history, but perhaps has forgotten. It's interesting. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second, and we'll go to those buildings that you
Understand the development and our role here in Montclair in the national Italian American
Context.
evolution.
Yeah, uh-huh.
It's very interesting because of the point in time, and then the volume of the number of the people immigrating.
Absolutely.
Because Brooklyn and Newark, at the point when Montclair was beginning to have Italian Americans, that was the late 1800s, the 1890s.
Right.
That was because, for example, I know my family, who then lived in Newark and had been here since the 1870s, they were already professionals and offering services.
Right.
And that had, jobs, housing, legal service, and medical services, sponsoring and having people arrive and taking that responsibility.
Right.
Apparently that was already saturated by the late 1890s when they started arriving in Montclair. This was an opportunity for them. There was the sewer system and the water system to build.
Right.
So we had two communities from Italy, Lacedonia and
Lacedonia and Calitri, and Cerami, Sicily.
Right.
Many
At that
families
time.
came over. They were related as well.
Chain migration.
Yes, to come here to work and to live.
Right.
Basically, this neighborhood developed because of that, and it was.
Please go ahead.
It was important in that point of history because the volume of the migration was getting greater and greater and greater.
Exactly.
So we're still at like a turning point here in Montclair. It was still sort of rare to be an Italian.
Right.
In America. They didn't know what to do with them really.
Right.
They were. There's even writings about these men that wear red bandanas.
I read that.
Earrings.
Yes. They're exotic singers out in the starry night. Exactly.
And unpredictable tempers.
Right.
They're talking about maybe a group of Italians who are very related to the earth and agriculture.
Absolutely.
Whereas also professionals were coming and people who had studied and had degrees and were coming here for the opportunity to live without the government
Political oppression and so on. Excellent, thank you. This is the Club Aquilonese, where I think the Aquilonesi still meet. This is that building. Okay. So, this is 80 and 78 Pine Street. This is 80 and 78 Pine Street. Okay, Frank, go ahead. What can you tell us about
this is such a good example. These two buildings, but also the context they're in. It's such a good example of the building that pertained to the Italian American community. Because, all right, if we look at the corner in the light, we see, well, that building has been modified quite a lot in the 1900s, the one on the corner, but then the one next to it.
The gray?
Yes, the gray one. We see the origins of an early 1800s wooden farm building.
Okay.
And it was on a road, but then behind it, there could have been land, or it could have been a warehouse, it could have been a store. Just like this little building here, this volume was just sort of like built as some kind of commercial or warehouse purposes. But then if we go back to these houses, what's interesting is, all right, we're seeing a building technology of solid wall brick masonry with terracotta decorations. That what looks like stone is actually hollow cast terracotta. And this is the building technology of the time, because even in New York City or in Newark, when you were building bigger buildings, you were using this kind of construction. you have a wooden frame, and then you have the solid brick masonry. You have the roof with a cock loft with air.
Okay.
The terracotta is pinned to the structure, usually with wire.
Okay.
And then it's all, bricked in. And this was, a way of putting a nice facade on a building. The building could be either, just housing for families where you would have apartments, that type, where people would have bedrooms and bathrooms. Or it could even be a tenement building. I assume this one would be more like that. It would have a nice facade, but then it would be much more modest inside with less services for the people. But I would say that this is a very good example, looking here up until the church. Now, Donato, maybe you could tell me
I don't really know. I was just thinking of myself.
You don't
This
know
one, this
house?
little one.
Yeah, this looks to me like a house owned by a family. Maybe there were two brothers or two sisters that, divided the house into separate
Apartments.
floors
Yeah.
for their family, and they shared the yard, and they shared the garden space and whatever. And this would be somebody maybe who had more means, a family that had more means and were able to live well and comfortably up Bloomfield Avenue to another community.
I'll pause it for a second.
Buildings have been bought by the same people. They're a firm from East Hanover. One of the sons, one of the people in the firm is the son of one of my ex-boss on the fire department.
Oh.
And my boss grew up in this area.
Okay.
So they returned, and I know that they bought 3 buildings, 95 being one of them, 78 being the other. They put this one too now. I think they're doing work on it now.
I see.
But they're restoring them. So.
Well, also, Donato, you know more about this. I think there is a trend now in the community, in the church community, whereas. Basically, recently, most families that were part of the church community have already moved out of this neighborhood to more comfortable or to larger houses or whatever, or even to other communities. I believe now that there's a trend that people are tending to be interested in reconnecting back to here, and to buy back or to take over their grandmother's apartment. Maybe they had a property where nobody's using it anymore, and they're interested in moving back. Because before this was it was rather modest, but in the development of Montclair and in being so close to New York City,
certainly now with the new train line and everything.
A new train line, and now that the world has evolved, and you find Italian Americans, just like any other group who can have maybe a $20 million house in Southampton, they might be thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to get back to our roots and our community and to do things and to be able to help? So I find that's also
interesting.
We see evidence of that in like a number of places. St. Lucy's in Newark, you can see that area was the same. There was a lot of white flight, I guess, in that area. They're coming back to support the parish. Just now, and just starting to support Mount Carmel now. People in our oral histories. I mean, most of them they have fond memories of this area and growing up together as a community. Everything was here for you. It was kind of enclosed. You didn't have to leave the community. Pretty much, you can buy all your all your food products.
Had everything you needed. Absolutely.
Right here within a walking distance.
Very self-contained. Okay, I'm going to pause.
What we're seeing is just a typical way of building a building. You have a brick masonry facade. Brick is porous. It has to allow water to come in and water to come out. When it rains, it also has to allow the water to wash down. It goes in and out of the structure. There's flashing, metal flashing, copper flashing over the steel units. If there's
What's flashing?
Flashing is waterproofing.
Oh, okay.
The structure behind the brick is waterproofed so that it doesn't rot or deteriorate. You usually have a cornice, and that prevents the rain from washing down the facade. It's sort of like a shield.
I see.
there can also be a water table. A water table is something like that. It breaks the rain runoff. It makes it drip onto the sidewalk rather than running down the facade. And so basically we're looking at a very typical ways of building in that era.
Okay. Okay, great.
And that's what the Italian contractor's specialty really was.
Precisely.
You know, and he had the expertise of muratori, the Italians who were used to working with mortar and stone and
Precisely.
tuffo and whatever. So the Italian Americans did have that advantage that in you know, their original country, Italy, but you know, maybe the Kingdom of Naples and two Sicilies or whatever, they already knew how to do that. So that was a skill that enabled them to work in the United States. And since there was a big boom of building, especially, you know, larger buildings, the apartment buildings, brick masonry buildings, they always had work here. It was just a matter of setting it up for them and locating them. Tony's Brook is one of the key elements in axis of transportation and migration and movement in Montclair. The women, let's say, while the men were working as bricklayers and masons and whatever, or offering services.
Go ahead.
Tony's Brook in that time was quite busy, and it had a very important role because the Italian American women who were here began to have the possibility of working in the houses, in the bigger, you know, in the large estates and whatever. Women could take in wash to do and ironing, and Tony's Brook was an important place. Even farther up in Frog Hollow, where there were Irish immigrants and later the African Americans who immigrated from the South could do washing and ironing. The women could do that while the men were off working. So, I mean, that was going on, let's say, here. We have Tony's Brook. Tony's Brook was very important also in abolitionism because it was a means of moving people up. Not on a main road that was controlled. This connects also, you know, down to Bloomfield, where there's the Morris Canal, which was another important axis of transportation for abolitionism and for whatever. But anyway, so this was very important.
Got me on film.
Yeah, I gotcha. Thank you.
To sort of give you a landscape of what this area was like when the Italian Americans arrived. This was all farmland. They were fields. There's stone walls from the 1700s and even the 1600s that are still here in the neighborhood behind some of these houses. We still have fragments of that, of the agricultural land. The houses along this street,
Glenridge
Avenue, are very old. They're original. Of course, now we see them modified, or we see that they've been demolished and with later constructions. But this was important because it was an axis of commerce and goods and services. So, you know, this is an important place geographically because you have Tony's Brook and you have the old road. These buildings were built by, you know, Italian Americans. It could have been built by the family for their own use, or it could have been a property that they would rent out. But it was a proud possession to have un palazzo in your town, and this is another example. We see the same building type. We see the brick masonry, the terracotta.
Yeah, this is is that copper up
That's
top?
a copper. Yes, that's these are hollow copper cornices that are behind them. They have wooden structures. The copper's nailed to that or wired to that.
Now, is the copper chosen just for decorative reasons?
Oh yes, it was a trend. You would either have copper, you would either have you know, terracotta. You couldn't use stone past the first and second floors usually because of the weight on the structure.
Oh, I see.
So you had the terracotta, and terracotta is an expertise from Italy.
Exactly.
And that most buildings in New York City and in Newark that are valuable, decorative architectural buildings have terracotta facades, and that's fabricated usually by Italian. There's an old farmhouse building there.
The white one?
Yeah, well, I call it a farmhouse. I mean, it's a building that was used along the main road of commerce, so it could have been somebody that worked in transportation or dry goods. I know that there has been African American families who have worked in transport and transportation services on Morris Canal, going way back, even before slavery was abolished. There were families who were free to have a business. The Sidnor family, for example, who had
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
the Sidnor family, an African American family that had a moving business using the Morris Canal. They could have been even moving people into freedom.
Right.
We're walking down towards, east towards Glen Ridge. Right after the school there begins another type of zoning or neighborhood, and that is more of an ex-farm, pre-suburban to suburban villas owned by people with means.
Right.
So that's why on Glenridge Avenue, going towards Glenridge, we see these lovely little Victorian cottages. They're like little mansions. And perhaps the Italian Americans who lived here could offer services to these people who had means. And then eventually everything sort of dissolved into each other.
Right. The Italians with means
would buy or build, larger homes with beautiful properties, more comfortable, luxurious houses. Then you have the Mini Lucy Center.
Right, which I will take in a second.
Yes, and that's right here. So, let's say in the evolution of the Italian American community, even this area, sort of the use of what was going on or the activities evolved from community centers into just Italians becoming part of the neighborhood.
The fabric of the larger neighborhood.
Yeah, of the large American neighborhood.
Exactly.
Let's say the more established American neighborhood. They went from the little nucleus of an immigrant community to the larger Italian, American
community,
Yes, American community. To give you an idea of what the interior of these houses were like for the Italian American family.
Okay.
All right. This is just for the example. This would be a house where I would call it a single or two-family house, but it would always be for a family. Maybe his brother or his sister had the apartment upstairs with her family, and then the others. But then they would share. They would share the garden. They would share usually the basement. And I'm talking about this because I know from my own family, whose house was in Newark, where they had their own single-family house. It was a nice house. The basement floor was basically devoted to the kitchen and the workrooms, and it was more linked to the land around the house, because we didn't, back then you still had booming agriculture, so you had beautiful produce. You would make perhaps wine. You would grow tomatoes and figs,
tomato sauce, etc.
And so that was basically something that was devoted to the ground floor because it had easy access to the
land around.
To the land. And then on the first floor, you usually had the reception rooms, the entry hall, the living room, the dining room. and maybe another smaller kitchen that had a butler's pantry that connected that to the the dining room.
Right. But not that these people would have butlers.
Well, no.
I don't know.
Butler's pantry. Well, people did have services, and this is interesting because my family would always tell the story about how when they were alone and just having everyday family life, they had a domestic from Italy, and she would do all of the cooking, and she was sort of like the queen of the kitchen. And everything was being made. The pastiere, they would have the assembly line of pastiere for Easter, and you'd make about 20 of them, and you'd give maybe 15 away to whoever was needy, and then you would keep 5 for your own family.
That's wonderful.
And then the menu was of course it was an Italian menu, and you would have to have the olive oil and whatever. But when an American would have to come to dinner, everything would change.
How so? The menu changed?
So the menu changed. Mrs. Hill, who was also employed in the house, who was an African American, and she basically would do the rooms and make the beds and do the ironing and the wash. She was then asked to make a pot roast or something like that, something
potatoes.
American, and that way
the guest would feel at home, right?
My grandfather would accommodate his American. My grandfather was American; he was born here, but his father came over from the Kingdom of Naples before Italy was a country. So that was very interesting, and also my aunt has an interesting story. She was a very good student in grammar school. She was very pretty and very well dressed and very popular. However, even in elementary school, she realized that she was coming from a family that had a double life. They had their Italian traditional life at home.
One identity.
Yes, drinking wine at the table and a certain menu and observation of holidays that you would never really even mention when you were out
of course not.
In the American world. She said that during a health class lesson, like home economics or health, all of the students were asked to get up and tell what they had for breakfast. So.
Oh my goodness! Go ahead. I can just imagine.
So my aunt said that she stood up. She was asked to stand up, being like the perfect little girl. And she said, "Well, we had poached eggs, and we had toast, and we had orange juice, and we had muffins with jelly and." Well, all of that she made up. Because...
What did they really have?
In the basement level, in the real kitchen of the house, where there was the wood-burning stove always going all day long, it usually had a big pot of minestrone going.
Oh, wonderful.
It had a burner that had the caffettiere napolitana, the Neapolitan coffee pot all day, keeping the coffee warm. It had... another container of hot chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
That was very popular, and I think that she said that basically what they would have for breakfast with her grandfather was peppers and eggs.
I love it. Okay.
And sausages, and maybe a little limoncello for the cold weather before they went off to school at 8 in the morning.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can see how she would have edited that out. Excellent. Thank you, Frank. To go back now, so that was the first floor of these buildings, so to speak, and the kitchen area. Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, you would have the interior space. You'd have beautiful. You would start. You would have beautiful furniture and porcelains and things, maybe from Italy directly. You had stores in Newark where you could acquire Italian furniture. And then you had the bedroom levels upstairs on the second floor and the third floor and the attic floor. If the family had domestics, they were usually in rooms with sinks in the attic floor. But this is also very interesting. Italian Americans still had their tradition coming from Italy
Uh-huh.
of making a lot of their own
Linens? and
linens.
things? Right.
Especially for when a daughter would get married, you
Right,
would have a bedroom just devoted to women sewing and
corredo.
doing the corredo. They
Right.
would be doing monograms on
Right,
things.
right,
They
right.
would be even looming sheets.
Right.
It
Linen
is.
sheets, yeah. yeah
You
yeah.
would be looming sheets out of pure linen,
Right.
or you would be doing it from cotton. But this
Right.
was a production line. When a girl had to get married, she had to have her corredo. She had to have everything she needed for her house.
Exactly.
You know, she got a few old things from her parents, and then whatever. So that was another way. So basically, that was this one type of house,
Okay.
the single-family house.
Excellent. Thank you. And here we have something else. Yeah.
Then we have a house that's a multiple family dwelling. It's still very comfortable because you would have a kitchen for every unit, and you would have a bathroom for every unit.
Okay.
And that was private,
Right.
so
right.
that the family did have their own bathroom.
Right.
This was a phase, let's say, an intermediary phase in the evolution of the Italian American, where
Okay.
it was inserted. Money was coming in.
Right.
There was a job, or or there was work or
Right.
a profession, and
Right.
it would permit the family to live in a more comfortable circumstances, and then
Than a
maybe
tenement, so to
someday.
speak.
Yes.
Right.
No, we wouldn't call it. It would be like today's apartment, just
Okay.
like a normal
Right,
apartment.
right, okay.
A tenement. I don't want to point to this and say it's a tenement.
No,
It
no,
looks
I
to me
understand.
that it could have been built that way.
How would that differ, though? Let's see, even if it's not this building, how would a tenement differ then in makeup and
A
in...
tenement is usually 2 rooms.
Okay.
A family's given 2 rooms.
Okay.
This relates back to the house in Italy that's called the bascio. In Italy, in Naples, there's this type of house where you have just 2 rooms.
Okay.
You have a living room, which was the kitchen.
Okay.
So that's where everything was cooked and all of the food was served, and the family would
Okay.
be there. So
Okay.
that was usually the front room.
Okay.
And then you'd have the room in the back that usually didn't have any windows, and that was the sleeping room,
Right,
and that's where
right.
everyone slept. It could
Everyone.
have been a family of 10.
Absolutely.
Everyone slept there.
Right.
And then the bathroom was basically
Maybe down the hall or
down the
something?
hall.
Right.
Maybe one for every floor.
Right.
And when we refer to a tenement, that's what we usually refer
Okay.
to. We
Okay.
refer to very small quarters where a family nucleus could live, which would be
Exactly.
2 rooms, a
Right,
room for
right.
the day, a room for the night, and then the bathroom would be shared.
Right.
Um,
Quite claustrophobic. I'm rereading Christ in Concrete, which it talks about. Obviously, a lot of tenements in New York, and the fact that many of the families' children were tubercular, and they were just enclosed areas, not enough air to breathe in, and everything. So in an urban
exactly.
cityscape, it was
Well,
horrible,
exactly.
yeah.
But we also have to realize that a tenement was really a step up for a lot of immigrants,
Okay.
because let's look at New York City. People are arriving. Teams and teams
Exactly,
of people were
exactly.
arriving every day. They had
Exactly.
no place to live. They still weren't inserted.
Right.
Most of them were sponsored, but a lot of them were not.
Right. Okay, I'm going to
And-
pause. I'm
all
going to
right.
pause, Frank. It represented a step up.
Well, it was, because it was a way of really being inserted.
Right.
Because the immigrants that were arriving daily in the thousands
Right.
from overseas arrived in a city where there was no rubbish removal.
Right.
They were just beginning to put in sewer systems. There was a lot of disease. There was typhoid, cholera.
Right.
There were livestock running around
Yeah,
because people
yeah.
would build little shanties, and they would have their 8 children and their pigs and their dogs running around.
Absolutely.
No
like in a
rubbish
little town in
removal.
Italy. I mean, yeah.
Right. The children weren't inserted into schools yet.
Right.
All right. So going to live in a tenement was basically finally being able to have
Right,
someplace
right,
comfortable.
Right. An anchor.
Right, a beginning.
Right. Right. Okay.
And
Anything else you can say about the structure? You said 2 rooms, communal bathroom probably down the hall.
yes, where I'm sure people were extremely concerned with hygiene,
Right.
and everyone pitched in to keep
Right.
the place clean and
Right.
hygienic, and
Right, right.
so this and they could share things, and so a tenement was a way. It's civilized.
Right.
It's a.
Right.
It has a place in the evolution of, a civilized means of living.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.
In this building, there are perhaps 2 units per floor, and I would say that because there's the main entrance, and then you would have a corridor in the middle, and
Right.
and or just the stairwell with the entrances, and then if we look in the back, there's like these wooden porches that are built onto the back facade of the buildings. and
Okay,
that's-
right.
That's the second entrance.
Okay, right. You were saying that before.
A means of egress, and there would
Right.
be a stair going down to the garden where people could have garden. Here we have a building that is, I could say that this was a building originally built as a tenement building,
Okay.
because you can tell by the window arrangement on the facades that you have units that have like maybe 2 rooms,
Okay,
and then
okay.
they're repeated. You can see that there's a situation that has maybe 2 windows that was like the day room,
Okay.
and then the kitchen basically, and you see that's right off the balconies in the back, and the main
Oh,
entrance.
I see. Yes.
So that's like the kitchen, and then the room next to that is like the sleeping room.
Okay.
And then that repeats to another apartment that unfortunately does not have a balcony over the kitchen, but then right next to that you see the small windows that could have been for the communal bathrooms.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Thank you. This is Bay Street, and on the corner is the
Hi, how are you?
building that Frank was describing.
All right, what we're looking at now with the train and the Bay Street station, this was a large, very dense part of the Italian-American First Ward neighborhood.
Right, indeed.
Also for African American, that was demolished to make way for this train connection.
Right.
Look back here. This was another important street in the community, but then we have more, from a more urban, closer together. We have single-family houses where Donata's grandmother had her house, and
Where? Oh, my great grandmother.
your great-grandmother.
Hello.
Hi. Where was her house, Donato?
13 Grand Street, right around the corner. It was taken down for the last round of the train connection.
I see.
So actually the train goes right over where our house was.
Okay.
You can set that
The building where Wadi's restaurant
is now.
yes.
That store was a bakery. It was a Italian bakery owned by Chris. I can't remember. He was Greek. It was Finest Bakery.
Right.
His wife was
We
Italian.
have that in the interviews. Yes.
Next door to that, we're going to go to Nicola's Bakery. In 1962, 61, 62,
Okay.
Nicola had a little pizzeria there.
Okay.
Until like 1969, and then he opened the bakery in 1969, 1970. So we'll be going to that.
Okay.
This corner here, across the street. Well, Bay Street actually used to go to Bloomfield Avenue, not Pine Street.
Right.
And that area there was shops, there was butcher shops, chicken market. There was a lot of markets here. The Montclair Democratic Club was there.
Right.
That was
I've read
Curly
about that.
Angelino's Club. We have pictures of that. That was right there across the street, and on the side of Bay Street. So we're just talking about maybe the St. Sebastian Society moving into here. We're trying to talk about getting rent for it. So it's very small, but they St. Sebastian Society used to have a club where now Domino's Pizza is there.
Yes.
They had a club. They had a very big club there, and in the back they had bocce courts.
Okay.
I think they began on the side across the street, and then they moved to that up there.
Because it was the, let's say, the second means of egress to the exterior.
Okay.
Quiet
it-
fire escape. Yeah.
Yeah, the fire escape. Basically, what it does in the building code, it sort of like acts as a fire escape, but it's built in a more comfortable way so that it's near the kitchen and the family can, use it to dry clothing and to maybe make their pomarola or whatever.
Excellent.
And then it was close to the garden where there were fruit trees or tomatoes or things like that.
Donato has just said that the Fosco family was a big building family in Montclair. Thank you for pointing that out, Frank. 1913.
Let me, real quick.
So you were saying the Fosco family was a big building family, Donato?
Fusco was a big contracting family.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember the names. It was Mike Fusco was one. Later on, Mike Fusco owned a lot of property in town. He owned the Suburban Restaurant and Lounge, which is now the office.
Oh, yes, yes.
But among Italian Americans, if you wanted to work for Public Works or anything in town,
Right.
he was the padrone. You went and talked to him in the back of his restaurant,
Ah.
and whatever deal you made, and he would, if he pleased,
Right.
he would be the person that would get you to work. And,
Right,
most of the people, the water department in town, a lot of Public Works, any Italian American. My grandfather, and I don't know how my grandfather had a job, but he worked in Public Works there also. But they all worked on the water department or in the tree department.
Right, right.
It was all a system because you had to, in order to become an American, you had to be sponsored, you had to have work, a home, and make money. So,
Exactly.
I mean, that's what, my great-grandfather was a builder. He would give jobs, as I had mentioned before.
Right, right.
Construction jobs, housing to the family, and then medical and legal
Exactly,
services
exactly.
from the other brothers
Right,
who
right.
were, a physician and a lawyer. Because I see that there's 2 bathrooms
I
on
think
this side.
it originally was. I don't know. I don't know what they've done with it.
If we look at the windows, it sort of gives us an idea how the interior spaces are divided. I would say that this was built as a tenement building.
There's only 3 bathrooms there on the side, right?
Yeah, well, there's 2 bathrooms on this side, probably 2 on the other side.
3.
No, there's 2 per floor. On every floor, there's let's say 4 bathrooms, and there are
I see.
1, 2. So on every floor, there are 4 units and 4 bathrooms.
Okay.
Okay, across the street was originally Baldwin Street School, where Minnie Lucy got started as a social worker, and then later on was called George Washington School, and then in the 1960s, you have to check with the church.
I will.
It became Mont Carmel School. They bought it. It had been vacant as a town school for a while, and they ran it, I think, for 9 years as a church school. The problem, I think, became that the nuns that were taking care of it, the Filipinis,
Right.
I think that they were unable to do it anymore.
Right.
And that's why they had to sell it.
And the same, you could even put together the green peppers, like the quarter peppers. All right. Can you put it all in one thing, like in one? Yeah.
Let people. They couldn't afford socks. We have our mothers. No, it's just funny. Now I never wear them either.
That's great. That's great. So Donato, I mean, you were saying about your grandmother before. Well, Frank reminded us of the pot of hot cocoa that was always there.
That was my father's mother, but there was always a cocoa a huge pot of cocoa on the stove. All year, every day, and the kids in the neighborhood thought my family was rich because they could afford the cocoa, so they were all there at the school. And literally 40 kids. My family had, between the two sisters, they had 28 children in and out of there, and then they had maybe all the neighborhood kids would come in.
Right.
African Americans and Italians.
So it's like a meeting point.
I think one of the other tapes on this year was the neighbor. He speaks about that. He speaks about how he felt that our family had a lot of money for cocoa. guess we did because I guess the milk and the.
Yeah, you had enough to make it.
They made it with evaporated milk mostly.
Okay.
And water.
Okay, great.
That, 1937. My uncle and his friends, actually two of my uncles and their friends, they took a ride up to see Saviano family in Natick, Massachusetts. They were from Lacedon, and also friends of the Conditias. Turns out that they knew the Geronimos, and they wound up staying over there. So we have a lot of photos, and I guess some of the Saviano women kind of got together. They came down and visited. And the interesting thing, when they were in Natick, my uncle tells a story. Saviano, they were riding around looking for this, and this man said, "Can I help you?" And we're looking for the Saviano family. He said, "That's me." So when they stayed, the four boys, they stayed. They put them in these two rooms. And in the morning, they stayed there 2 nights. Each morning they got up and they had steak and eggs. And I'm sure that was the budget for the whole week for these people.
You can imagine.
So now they came down to visit. The Saviano family came down to visit within a few months. And of course, my grandfather had to serve them steak and eggs.
Sure.
It's a great story.
It is. It is.
Actually, we should talk to my Uncle Joey again soon.
Okay.
He was telling a lot of great stories.
Okay. Will do. And you still have that. I'm just going to talk in about Minnie Lucy,
who was born in 1902. So I remember her telling me she went to classes at Minnie Lucy, and she had to borrow a baby, one of the babies to go in because they were giving like natal care and prenatal care stuff, and to Italians. It was mostly Italians and African Americans. Right. And I guess she was just Minnie Lucy was sounded like a saint at this point. She died at a very young age. But I think she moved from Baldwin. The town had hired her as a social worker, which goes to your point. The town was ahead of the curve on this, and this is in the early 1900s. So she moved from the school, and at some point that school was built for her. And we don't. That's the link we're missing.
Okay. Well,
how are you?
But the building,
You behaving yourself?
it's interesting to note.
myself.
Having fun, I hope.
I am. I took you
It's interesting.
Note that the Minnie Lucy Mission building
Joe, how are you?
is built in Italian building materials. It has an Italian terracotta roof. This is something that we have to further research to see if it was entirely built by Italian builders, but I believe so, just because of the fact that it was built in the Italian style with Italian building materials.
Okay, we'll have to check.
And then a similar initiative for this neighborhood was the Anna Crane House, which is now the funeral parlor, Cajano Funeral Home. That was another. Wasn't that someplace that your aunt even told us about? That was a social.
No, it was actually like a preschool. It was a preschool, and there was some. As my mother used to say, it was a holy roller, but I think it had some kind of religion. It wasn't Catholic. There was the person who was there, and I can't remember his name. We should find that out. He wasn't Catholic, but he lived in that house. He operated as like a school, and a little bit of a ministry. But a lot of the Italian kids were going there at preschool. And there's some stories about it. Actually, some of our Fred Ruccio talks about going there.
Right.
But there were some other people also. We need to find out his name for one.
Okay.
Pat Cajano was doing funerals in the home. He went to school for it, and I was speaking with his youngest daughter, and she was giving me a little brief history on it, but not all the details about him buying it and the process he was going through to buy it, and and down the road, the Yankee Funeral Home was on the corner of Claremont and Grove Street, and I think that there was a rivalry.
It's now the Drew.
Right, it's now Drew. I think that they were very upset about him getting a funeral home. Actually, Pat's wife was around and very knowledgeable, so we should really talk to her.
Also, Anna Crane, who owned that property, had no children because she was never married.
She ran out of film. She'll have to come back for you. Okay. No, I walked out of it. But
My brother's usually a better interview than me. I talk too slow.
No, it's all right. It's great for picking up what you have to say. We're here at your lovely establishment and we hope to involve you in the oral history project this semester, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so now you're on tape saying it's okay, so we'll be
It's
back.
okay.
Okay. Thanks. Can you tell us a little bit about your establishment, when it was opened?
Well,
and
my father started the business in 1967,
Uh-huh.
and it was basically just the storefront right here and a coal burning oven,
Uh-huh.
and it started off very slowly. It took
Okay.
years to get going.
Right.
There was 3 or 4 bakeries right in this neighborhood,
right.
and it just snowballed from there into the business it is today.
Right.
And it's a good business. It's a lot of
Fantastic.
work, and
Right.
but we make a lot of Italian bread
Exactly.
every day.
Exactly. I know. I've bought it here. What's the one specialty that you think you're the most famous for?
I think our semolina with seeds
Okay.
is can't compare with anyone.
Okay.
Ours is better than
From in Italy, basically. Would that be from Sicily?
the semolina bread.
Yeah,
No, I don't think it is.
because in Palermo you have a semolina bread with the sesame seeds. That's their typical.
Don could probably answer that for you better. I'm not very familiar with the regions of Italy
Okay.
and where the actual breads are from.
Okay, we're just about to finish, so we will look forward to continuing this conversation with you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.